If you have a Bible with you, would love for you to turn with me to the book of Exodus. Of all the stories in Exodus, probably the two most famous are the crossing of the Red Sea and the text I want to look at with you in this moment, Exodus chapter 3, beginning at verse 1. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law, Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good and broad land, a land that's full of milk and honey. A place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all live. Now the Israelites' cries of injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I'll be with you, and this will show you that I'm the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they're going to ask me, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. Say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God continued, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how all generations will remember me." So we have this amazing moment where the flame shows up but doesn't consume the bush, the burning bush, and Moses sees it, and he realizes he's in a holy place in the presence of a holy God. And so he takes off his shoes and he hears this command to go back. It's a powerful moment. There's so many things we could think about here. I love to think about the way in which the fire there in the desert that doesn't consume reminds me of a day that's coming up in our church year, the day of Pentecost, where the fire of God's presence shows up and changes but doesn't consume those on whom the fire falls. There's so much about holiness here. There's so much here about the God who hears the cries of the oppressed, the God who isn't associated with the powerful like Pharaoh, but the God who is associated with those that get overlooked. But the part I'd like to think about for just a little bit is actually the way Moses speaks back to God. Biblical scholars think this is an interesting text compared to some other ancient religions where when the gods or God speaks, it's out of power and there's no sort of pushback. There's no talking back to the gods or to God. You just do what the gods tell you to do. And yet here God invites Moses into his work. But it's as though God needs Moses to do this. Without him, the work gets thwarted. But the call of God actually invites Moses to speak back, to express doubts, to wonder what name he should go in, to think about the challenges out in front of him. The conversation that Moses has in front of the burning bush is this. It's a conversation. So many scholars point to that the Israelites' vision of God was of a God who is on the side of the oppressed, a God who doesn't change. And so the name that he gives him, the sacred name, Yahweh or Jehovah, that name that means I am what I am. I will be what I will be. That this God whose character and nature is covenant and love and participation and connection to those who are overlooked. That God who doesn't change invites us with our change, our doubts, our struggles, our lack of faith. He invites us into his work, but he invites us to share that with him, to push back, to live a kind of real life in the midst of trying to figure out how to live out God's call. This God invites us into conversation. I think that's important for us as we think about God's will. Working with college students in particular, they always want to think about what's God's will for them. What's God's will about them getting married? What's God's will for their major, for their job, for where they're going to live? We look for God's will in that. I think part of what this text tells us is God's will is always the same. God's will is always to invite us into his mission of liberation and change, his mission of new creation and redemption, his mission that hears the cries of those who are broken. And yet the way that we live that out is open for conversation with God. That gives me a little bit of an ability to rest a bit. Not in the sense that I can do whatever I want to. I don't get to rest because, in a sense, God is always calling and pulling us into his mission, but it also allows me to realize that there are ways for us to live that out, and there's not just one set plan, but God works in what some theologians call the synergy of his purposes, the synergy of his will. So is there one job for me to do or one place for me to live? The answer to that is, I don't know. There's maybe some wisdom from God in that. But that God is looking for us in the jobs that we do, in the places we live, in the things that we participate in, to find that thing that fits the ways he's gifted us, the way that fits us temperamentally and personality-wise, but to find how what we are doing fits into the overall mission that he has called us into. And maybe that gives us a chance to rest, because then we don't have to constantly worry that maybe we've missed out on God's purposes. But on the other hand, maybe it invites us to recognize we're on holy ground because God is inviting us into his mission and purpose in the world. So I love that Moses pushes back, has questions for God. But I love that God says, listen, Moses, I am that I am. My purposes won't change. But I'm going to invite you in with all of your temperamentalness, with all of your senses of inadequacy. I'm going to invite you into this, and we can journey together and see where this goes and what new creation might bring. I would love for you to talk about your own sense of God's will tonight. Maybe you can share about the ways in which you feel like God has directed you and brought you into things that you really do feel like are part of his redemptive work. Maybe some of you can share about where you sense God is directing and calling you right now. Maybe some of you can even have stories to share about times where you sense that God used you in ways that you didn't expect, as he hasn't changed, but as you have found over and over and over again in various ways, invitations into his purposes. I love that God doesn't just always say, this is the way it is, now line up, but that he keeps inviting us into his mission, and we get to keep walking and trusting him. May the Lord bless you as you talk together about his purposes.